So when we take it past Ohio State and we'll pop up the schedule here, what in particular stands out to you?
I mean, I think it really goes back to kind of what I said earlier. You have Ohio State, you have Clemson on the schedule at home, and you have USC. And I think obviously, USC has been down to an extent over the last few seasons, but you bring in Lincoln Riley, you get the transfers that they've gotten, the recruiting class that they sort of ended up with, and maybe it takes a year to sort of mesh and get that going, but overall, I mean, it's going to be a talent group. So, and then obviously I think BYU in Vegas, which is my hometown, is obviously something that I'm going to look at. And I think BYU is a talented program in their own right. And that's the Shamrock Series, which is always a fun time. So those are probably the 4 big games. They also play UNLV, which is ironic to me because that is my alma mater. And I'll probably find a way to get to that game if I can. Again, should be like a 70-0 blowout, but fun for me. And then they have the traditional, the other games that they play in the ACC that they've established over the last 7 to 10 years with that deal that they made where they play 4 to 6 programs on a yearly basis.
So obviously the complete difference between looking at this schedule versus anybody else in the country that matters. There's a couple other independents, but I don't think that there are a whole lot of live streams dedicated to New Mexico and UMass. When you look at this schedule, it's obviously completely built by Notre Dame. So in addition to analyzing it from the standpoint of, okay, these are the big balls, Ohio State, USC, Clemson, et cetera, and then these are some of the highlights for you. Just in terms of the approach to the schedule, the construction of the schedule, are you good with this? Are you good with the approach?
Yeah, I think the only thing I don't like is I wish that there was maybe one less like non-Power 5 game on there.
Okay.
Playing Marshall, fine, playing UNLV, whatever. I'd like to maybe only play, and then obviously, of course, you have Navy on the schedule on a yearly basis. I don't think you need to play both Marshall and UNLV. Does that make their schedule weak? No, I don't think so. But that's probably the one thing I would look at because I think we're starting to see that sort of built into their schedule on a more regular basis. And the last couple of years where maybe some programs they've played have been, somewhat down, then it does put a little bit of a damper on the schedule overall when, USC, Stanford, programs like that are not at their best. And then you have a UNLV and a Marshall on there. All of a sudden you have, maybe a weaker schedule than you would like, but it's certainly not weak in the way that some people say.
So Dave's got a comment here that I can line up with in terms of Notre Dame. The big transition in the schedule and the strength of the schedule has been this contract with the ACC. So displace Michigan State, Purdue, not that Purdue's typically a power, but replace those 3 and whomever else Notre Dame would have scheduled from, let's say, the SEC or somewhere else with these ACC games that, sure, Clemson's a rough out, of course, one of the best in the country. And then there might be a random game here and there. North Carolina a couple of years ago with Sam Howell, tough. Florida State, Miami have been down. The Louisvilles and Wake Forest of the world they're good teams, they're decent teams, but they're not top 10 caliber. They're more in that top 25 to 40 range. So when you look at the ACC component in this schedule, it's obviously brought down the schedule. This particular season, it's in addition to Clemson, BC, Syracuse, North Carolina on the road. So those are the other 4 in addition to the Clemson game.
Yeah, and I think that was kind of a point I was sort of getting at is I think when Notre Dame joined the ACC, they weren't expecting the ACC to all of a sudden be this, not forgotten conference, but it's kind of Clemson and everybody else. Unless you play Clemson on that schedule, the ACC has sort of been weak over the last several years. Florida State, who's been a powerhouse program for many years, is down. Miami, traditional powerhouse program, down. And then you have, Virginia Tech, who hasn't been as great over the last couple of years. Virginia has been sort of, up and down, whatever. I do actually want to get to the Willie comment because I completely disagree with that. And I saw that a few minutes ago. But yeah, no, I think that's a legitimate argument that the ACC has been somewhat weak. And I don't think Notre Dame was expecting that when they made this deal of having to play. It's usually 4 to 6 games. It was supposed to be 5, but with their schedule that they kind of had built in previously, sometimes it's 4, sometimes it's 6. But getting to Willie's comment, I think first of all, Notre Dame does play a lot of the same teams on a yearly basis, first and foremost, especially traditionally. I mean, you go back before the ACC, they played Michigan every year. That's 1. They played at USC every year. 2, they played Michigan State. 3, Navy. 4, Stanford. 5. So that's already 5 games. And then you throw in a lot of the other programs that they played, maybe not every single season, but very, very consistently. You're playing pretty much the same teams every year. And then now that you throw the ACC in there, do they always play the same team every year? No, but they play a lot of the same teams every year. And then you still throw in USC, Stanford, Navy that they play on a yearly basis. If you want to say Navy's trash, that's fine. But Navy's probably just as good as a lot of the bottom feeders in the Big Ten and different things like that, at least on a consistent basis. But so maybe they don't play the exact however many teams that the Big Ten teams play on a yearly basis. And you don't maybe have that. Well, Mark, you probably have a better idea just because I don't follow conference scheduling as much as, teams that are in a conference do. But I mean, how many actual teams is, like, for example, Michigan play yearly? I know even in the Big Ten, they have separate sides. Sure. And play everybody every year.
Yeah. So you get the 14 teams split into 2 17 divisions. So you play everyone in your division. So there's 6 games there, and then you play 3 other conference games in the other division, and those rotate. Unless you're Indiana and Purdue that are scheduled by the conference to play every year because of a rivalry. That's the only matchup, division to division, that is set every year. The rest of it just rotates. So yeah, one of the fallacies, if I can text somebody back there, one of the fallacies that people bring up, and they'll say this, this comes up in SEC discussions all the time, and the Big Ten to a lesser degree, is that, if so-and-so joined the Big Ten, well, they got to play Ohio State, Michigan State, Wisconsin, Iowa, Penn State. They run down the 7 or 8 best teams in the conference. And that's not the case. You're going to miss, you're playing 9 teams out of 14, or out of what would be the other 14. So you're going to play 2/3 of them. 2/3 of the best teams, most likely, in a given year.
Yeah, I mean, those are kind of my thoughts on it, to be honest with you. It's just, I don't really understand it too much, especially because kind of what I just ran down, the fact that Notre Dame plays a lot of the same teams on a yearly basis anyway. And I think that there's actually something to be said, because I think and I think you would agree with me on this, Mark, the conference, or most conferences, have a very similar style of play. And when Notre Dame has to play, Pac-12, they play usually an SEC team every year, or every couple of years. Then you have your couple teams that you play on a yearly basis, a couple of the ACC teams. You throw a Big Ten team in there. There's all these different styles of play, and I think you could argue that's sort of tougher to prepare for. But even without that, I still think they play a lot of the same teams. If not yearly, then very, very regularly. And that's where I kind of come into this whole idea that it's, like you mentioned, I think fallacies are really good word for it.